Oh, I should have asked you this before. Dr. Damman?
Yeah.
Dr. Chris? Damon, like Matt Damon.
As in Matt Damon, yeah, but some folks sometimes call me the man.
The man.
That was my high school moniker.
Oh. That's amazing. What would you like to be called in this podcast? Dr. Damon?
Damon works great.
Great. Okay. Welcome, Dr. Damon, or the man, as you said. Welcome to the Biohacker Babes podcast.
It's great to be here. Yeah. Thank you, Renee and Lauren, for the invitation.
Yeah, it was a near miss. We were just in Seattle, and such a great surprise to find out that you are indeed in Seattle right now. So we enjoyed your land very much, but we are back in New York and Vegas, and so covering the country today with this conversation.
Nice time to visit Seattle. The sunshine is actually here this time of year.
Yeah, I've never been in Seattle at any other time of year, so I'm just gonna, remain ignorant. I'm like, Seattle's beautiful all the time.
Yeah, right? What rain? There was no rain.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to soak up our vitamin D while we can.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're really excited to have this conversation. We talk a lot about metabolic health, and we're excited that gut health and metabolic health are being talked about more and more, definitely starting to show up in mainstream media. I always get excited when they say microbiome or metabolic health on the news. You're like, oh, we're infiltrating. It's awesome. But I do think there's still a bit of confusion about what metabolic health is. A lot of traditional doctors will run lipid panels, so they don't often review metabolic markers or how it is affected by our nutrition and the gut microbiome. I know this is a really big question to kick it off with, but how are metabolic health and gut health linked, and why are they both so essential for overall health?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. It just speaks to the microbiome in general at the core of health, and certainly metabolic is a huge piece of it. Immune health and actually brain health are also really important. But diving into the metabolic piece, we could go all the way back to antiquities and Hippocrates. Some might call him the sort of origin of modern medicine. And he said that the gut is the root of all disease, and followed that up with, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. I think that's as true today as perhaps it was, several thousand years ago. And I think that the medical community and actually the general community is certainly embracing that in a bigger way. And what's enabling that is the microbiome. The microbiome provides a really powerful lens for understanding how food is impacting the body at large. And food certainly contains the proteins, the fats, the sugars, even the micronutrients that are really important for the cells in our body. Maybe where we haven't focused as much and where we now have really powerful tools to understand is how that food impacts the microbes in our gut, their cells, and then how the microbes in turn impact us. One could think of the microbes almost as partners in health. And they produce factors that some of which you can get in the diet, so amino acids or B vitamins, but other things that you can't, and that are only really supplied by a healthy microbiome. A microbiome that's consuming things like high fiber foods or fiber supplements. Those things may not roll off the tongue quite as easily as B vitamins or amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, but are just as important. And so those are things like butyrate, which are a type of short chain fatty acid. Butyrate, you might think of as one of the microbiome superpowers, just as one might think of fiber as the microbiome superfood. And butyrate is probably certainly not the only, but one of the key molecules that's impacting health at large. The medical establishment, the scientific community recognizes the importance of butyrate in the gut, and promoting a tight gut or preventing leaky gut, and the implications of bacterial products getting into the bloodstream and causing inflammation. But butyrate is a pretty amazing molecule that actually gets absorbed into the bloodstream as well at much lower concentrations, but it's still there and it's still biologically relevant. And so circling back to your question, it was a big question, so there's a big answer.
Yeah, sorry. I expected that.
How the heck does the microbiome impact metabolism? Well, it impacts metabolism by creating these molecules derived from certain foods that the microbes like to make, and butyrate is one of them. I'll trace just one pathway that will give you a very clear example of how those microbial metabolites impact metabolism specifically. So there are key members of the microbiome that make butyrate. Butyrate is one of the key fuels for the cells lining the gut, especially in the colon and the lower gut. And those cells in turn make a hormone called GLP-1. GLP-1 is actually a blockbuster drug that's used to treat diabetes and blood glucose control, and actually weight loss. And there's a combination of GLP-1 with a different hormone, GIP, that just received an FDA approval for an indication in weight loss, and it's maybe one of the first in a couple decades. Really, really, really big news. And I think it was on the order of 20% or more weight loss that was seen. So these are really, really powerful hormones that the gut is producing. And we don't think of the gut as a hormone organ, but it is, and it might be one of the biggest ones. And it's through these hormones that are being produced that metabolism is regulated in part. So that GLP-1 that I talked about, so microbes to butyrate to GLP-1, that circulates in the body, that regulates the pancreas and release of insulin. It regulates how the stomach empties the food that we eat, how quickly that happens, the so-called gastric emptying time. And that's really important to how full we feel. And it also directly regulates satiety, which is how full we feel. That's mediated by our brain, our central nervous system. And those are just a few of the ways that GLP-1 is working, traced back to butyrate and the microbiome in food. I can list many more, but this has already been a really long answer. So let me stop here. I'll take a pause. Yeah. And
yeah. It's a complex topic. I have a specific question about butyrate. I mean, the research is pretty profound on it, but with so many people having gut dysbiosis and all kinds of issues, can the average person even make butyrate in the gut?
It's a really good question. And there are quite a few studies coming out now that are showing associations between low butyrate or low microbes in the gut microbiome that produce butyrate being associated with many diseases like autoimmune disease or metabolic disease, neurological disease. There's a lot of connections there. These are correlations, they're connections, just that. It doesn't prove causation. And the literature around providing butyrate as a therapeutic in people is much more sparse. There's certainly animal models that suggest that there's therapeutic benefit there.
Of just adding butyrate, like as a supplement.
That's correct, yeah. And that's certainly a strategy, and I think a strategy that needs to be studied more. But what I'm equally intrigued about is nature's way and how we might be able to enroll our partners in health, our sort of microbial factories in our gut to produce butyrate naturally in the right place, in the right amounts, at the right time, under the right regulation. And the jury is out on at this point, the degree to which you can simply give the right food for the microbes and they'll grow. Maybe they're present at low level amounts. And I'd say that's certainly a big part of the solution. Maybe the biggest part is if we can give these fibers, if you feed them, they will come type idea. Right. But
yeah, I love that. If you
Yeah.
feed them, they will come. That's a great.
It's like Field of Dreams, right?
Yeah.
If you build it, they will come. Yeah.
It's very hopeful. I love it.
I'm just picturing all these microbes out on the baseball field now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're saying food is more powerful than supplements, and I mean, maybe it's less expensive. What else is kind of in that environment? What other variables do we need to have in place to produce butyrate? And I guess how important is sleep? Because I know sleep can affect downregulation of GLP-1.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say categorically food is more powerful than supplements. I think in some cases, supplements can be more powerful because they're concentrated, and one has to distinguish between a butyrate supplement versus, say, a fiber supplement, et cetera. And different types of fiber are better or not as good at making butyrate. So, yeah, I do think that that's a really powerful way of, in the majority of people, getting butyrate at higher levels and butyrate producing organisms at higher levels. There's probably a smaller portion of the population whose gut might be something like a bleached coral reef, where that diversity is ravaged. And you can provide as much good fertilizer, so to speak, to that coral reef as you want, and it will never rebound to that beautiful, colorful, vibrant, aquarium-esque picture that we all have in our minds. And in those cases, the minority of people, there are efforts and companies that are looking at providing some of these gut commensals, the organisms that are naturally in our gut, if they're completely depleted, not just at low levels.
Yeah. I mean, the concept makes a lot of sense to me, that if we can just feed the microbes and let them do what they have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years in humans. I mean, you can compare that to so many other things in the health world, right? Like, instead of taking a synthetic multivitamin, maybe we just eat a whole food diet and let our body extract what it needs and kind of go through that. So instead of just jumping and throwing in, I guess, like a postbiotic, you're saying more, give the prebiotics, let the bugs do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the magic happens.
It's really well put. And we have this sort of paradigm that's been created of the pre, the pro, and the post biotics. And it's super confusing. People are like, what the heck is this like pre, pro, post biotic? It's confusing. But if I had to kind of choose which of those three approaches is going to be most powerful, it would be the bookends approach. So it'd be pre, probably number one, and post number two, and then pro would be number three. But in truth, combinations are really powerful. And so, yeah, I wouldn't completely discount any of the approaches.
Okay. That's a good answer.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a huge spectrum of gut dysfunction out there. So for the average person, which I don't know if you have statistics on that, like most people have some kind of gut dysfunction, correct? Like, where do we start? If a compound is probably the most powerful, you start with all three, or are you gonna start with food? What else do we need to know?
Yeah, I think some statistics say that, upwards of a third of individuals, 1 in 3, have some sort of functional GI disorder, whether it be IBS or, functional dyspepsia, et cetera. But how do we begin to sort of promote gut health back to maybe a healthy state and where, it should be in the first place? And I'm a big believer in diet. And Michael Pollan says it well. He says, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. I think that's really good advice. You can make it a lot more complicated. And we've heard public health messaging for a long, long time around, eat more of this or eat less of this. And
or this will kill you. What?
Or this will kill you. Yeah. But despite all of that, what's happening? Disease, metabolic disease, non-communicable disease, obesity, diabetes, it's only getting worse if you look at trajectories in a really, really scary way. So what's the solution? I'm a firm believer that there are complements to whole food approaches that will really help short circuit this problem. And I think that's where understanding how components of food that might be missing or processed out contribute to health and how we need to add those things back. And I think the microbiome and the gut provide a really powerful and new lens for shining a light on which of those components of food are really critical. And now that there's tools available for understanding the microbiome, I think this will lead to a revolution in how we approach food, not dissimilar from 100 plus years ago when we started to understand the macro and micronutrients of food. Proteins and carbohydrates, fats, vitamins and minerals. We will look back on the next 10, 20 years and realize that we've been missing key components that feed the microbiome and in turn feed us. And that was probably a big part of the non-communicable disease, the metabolic disease that we're seeing growing. So this circles back, what is the solution? The solution is follow Michael Pollan's advice. Number one, we should all do that. But I think there's a big role for maybe filling in the gaps of what's been taken out, perhaps with supplements. And I have this mantra, there's the 4 phonetic Fs of foods that feed the microbiome. And it's fiber, phenols, ferments, and good fats. And we can talk about each of those. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Can we start with fiber?
Sure. Yeah. So fiber is great. Fiber is maybe one of the preferred prebiotics or foods of our gut microbiome. Fiber is essentially a carbohydrate, if you can believe it, to use maybe a bad word in some circles.
Oh, no.
We don't allow carbs on this show.
Biohackers don't eat carbs.
It's truly a carbohydrate. Yeah. But it's a carbohydrate that's resistant to digestion by our own enzymes. And one of the key types of fiber is resistant starch. And so the name is right there. Again, another really a word that's been vilified, starch. But this is a starch of a different type. It's a type that doesn't contribute to spikes in blood sugar because it's not digested, at least digested by our enzymes in the upper intestine. It goes all the way through, mostly intact, to the lower intestine where the microbes feast on it and they produce butyrate. And then butyrate stimulates GLP-1, and GLP-1 has all these other wonderful effects. And that's just one pathway. They make neurotransmitters and amino acids and a number of other really powerful metabolites as well. So fiber is a really powerful way of enlisting our partners in health in the gut, the microbes. I could talk about specific fibers too, right? All fiber isn't created equal, and some causes bloating, and there's low FODMAP fibers and all of this. And this is a really important part of the conversation because people, when they hear fiber, they're like, oh, that'll just wreck my gut. But it's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people probably think I'm guessing like Metamucil powder.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or just psyllium husk in your water. You're like, it'll hold my nose.
Have you had psyllium before? It's just
sure. I definitely tried it.
Yeah.
Disgusting. Not if there's any benefits, not worth it.
I mean, if you don't drink it within seconds, it turns into a solid.
It's like cement.
Such a weird science experiment.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, and maybe you have a statistic on this. Like, I would imagine most Americans are not getting anywhere close to the amount of fiber they need. If you have a stat on that.
100%. So there are actually good stats. So this has been studied. The USDA comes out with a report every year, or actually every 5 years, but it was recently published. Only 5% of people get enough fiber. And it's,
Wow.
yeah, stop right there, right? Like that's
And
huge.
what's enough to you? I know Dr. Casey Means at Level says you need like 60 grams. I'm like, oh, that's a challenge.
She's the fiber queen.
Yeah. There's different opinions and different ways of measuring this. I will say, if you look at sort of ancestral diets, hunter-gatherer diets, which were high in tubers and nuts and things that have high fiber, you're approaching as much as 100 grams a day, and we see that in populations that still follow these lifestyles, like the Hadza in Tanzania and other parts of Africa. So is there an upper limit? Well, maybe 100 grams, but maybe not. So like you can go pretty high, right? But most people get maybe 15 grams.
Sure.
And what is recommended, and it depends on your age and your sex and your activity level, is plus or minus around 30 grams. So there's a gap there of about 15 grams. We're only getting about half as much as we need. That 30 grams there's studies that sort of look at thresholds where cardiovascular disease increases below a certain amount, and then other diseases, and so that's why this number around 30 grams has been chosen. But there's other ways of looking at this as well, and I would say 30 grams is a good starting point, right? Like, at least 30 grams. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, that's the minimum.
Yeah. I mean, to circle back to resistant starch, like the first foods that come to mind are like green bananas and cooled white rice, which doesn't really sound like a party on your plate. So like with those foods and just fat fiber in general, is there any chance of making eating fiber a little bit fun, or is it all just work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And part of the reason that fiber intake is so low is the whole foods that traditionally contain a lot of fiber, as you say, green bananas, legumes also tend to have higher resistant starch in particular. They're just not as much a part of our diet, and maybe not tuned to our current palates, which like processed foods, unfortunately, right? We're used to eating, delicious candy bars and, packaged goods. And I mean, don't get me wrong.
Cereal, fortified with
cereal,
fiber.
exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, the food industry has done amazing things for food insecurity and shelf stability. And this was very clear, during my time at the foundation. And foods like ready-to-use supplemental foods that came in foil pouches were invaluable for malnutrition. So we've really benefited from the approaches to processing, quite frankly, that have enabled that shelf stability and cost of goods. But there, I think, is a future where we understand the components of foods and how they're impacting the microbes in the gut specifically, that missing piece, that we can, in a rational way, fold back in these things that are missing and have been processed out. And I think that's where things like resistant starch come in. Adding those back, resistant starch is actually one of the better promoters of butyrate. Will stimulate that whole metabolic pathway that I was alluding to, and I think can make a really big dent in metabolic disease.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember the first time I think remember hearing about resistant starch. I had a client come into me maybe like 10 years ago, and she said, Dr. Oz is recommending that I cook my rice, then I put it in the fridge for an hour, and then I pull it back out and I eat it. And I'm like, it sounds like a lot of work to be doing that. But I mean, the research on resistant starch is pretty mind blowing. I don't think we can argue that. So maybe you can start to share a little bit of the magic of what you have created with SuperGut to make this easy for all of us, especially those of us that are only getting 15 grams of fiber a day. I might be guilty some days. I might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all are guilty, even, those that are steeped in this and know it well. There is a ton of research around resistant starch in particular, upwards of 200 peer-reviewed articles showing impact on metabolic health. And at company, at SuperGut, we have digested all those articles, so to speak, and come up with a fiber formula that we think is super powerful, that involves resistant starch and several different sources, not just from green bananas, but other sources as well, which I think is really important because all resistant starch isn't created equal and diversity is critical. But also including other fibers like beta-glucan, which comes from oats. It's a really powerful formula that we've studied now, and in a couple different contexts. One, in a small pilot where we gave just that fiber blend, nothing else, to individuals, and we showed a pretty profound decrease in the blood glucose spike that happens after eating high glycemic breakfast foods. So like bagels or it turns out Rice Krispies in rice milk is probably one of the worst things you can eat for spiking your blood sugar. And that data was presented at the American Diabetes Association just a few months ago at their big conference in New Orleans. And it's available in abstract form and on the SuperGut website. But what I'm super excited about is another large study. It's a gold standard study, a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial in almost 200 people, where we compared the SuperGut fiber-based shake to a very similar shake with very similar nutrient profile that was missing the fibers. Right, so those were two arms. That was the missing shake, the fiber missing the shake was the placebo arm. We had one other arm where we just provided the usual dietary advice. Like you go to a doctor, they say, okay, we'll go to this website and follow, the recommendations there. Eat more plants, right?
Yeah.
Not too much.
Not too much. Yeah.
Not too much. And we saw some really interesting results, really profound results. If you look at the shake compared to the placebo, there was a 0.7% reduction in hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of integrator of your blood glucose over the course of time, in this case, 3 months. And that's actually on par with a lot of diabetes drugs. And what was also really interesting is the side effect profile was essentially nil. In fact, if you compare the intervention to the diet arm, people's gut health actually improved. And we measured this with a validated gut health scale. So pretty interesting. It turns out the diet arm actually worsened. Maybe that's because people are having lots of high FODMAP fibers. I found that fascinating.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Talk about bad fibers. Interesting. And some people are so susceptible. It's pretty remarkable what you guys have created with SuperGut. I was telling you before we jumped on that I have a client that was using it, and despite my best efforts, and he really was very receptive to all my education about metabolic health and glucose excursions. He was like, listen, not going to change the way I'm eating. It's really important to me to eat these sandwiches with like big baguette pieces of bread and ramen and pasta. He started taking SuperGut and it just all flatlined, not flatlined, but it definitely diminished. And in some ways it made me really mad. I was like, well, you're still, potentially pulling in food toxins and GMOs. But if you're saying it improved gut health, is that like, are we really kind of, actually making improvements if we're not seeing, the metabolic health or the metabolic excursions and gut health diversity population is better?
Yeah, I think you key into a couple points there. One is, the importance of adding these things back and how that can make a difference, and adding to what we're eating already, as opposed to saying avoid these things. And products like SuperGut actually make that doable, because they're delicious, right? And people enjoy them. And it isn't a sacrifice. Yeah, it's not a sacrifice. It's like, are you kidding me? Are you telling me I can eat or have my cake and eat it too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
can't fight that. Yeah.
I can
It's
actually
not a Band-Aid. It's helping.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, some people say that the bars, some of them taste like candy bars. They're so delicious, right?
How did you do that?
Well, I mean, there's magic in the team, and sort of master nutritionists and folks that really understand ingredients and how they impact our taste. But yeah, they're quite delicious, and it just doesn't seem right that you're eating something so delicious and yet helping your health at the same time.
Yeah, you've solved a lot of problems there with that equation. So I'm curious with the fiber. We see a lot of people with SIBO nowadays. I don't know what's going on. It's just like on the rise. And it's hard with those people because, right, you want to put them on low FODMAP, and then you don't want to take them off all the fiber, but so many of the fibers are problematic. So how have you seen this work with SIBO patients?
Yeah, so we haven't evaluated specifically in folks with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But what I can say is SIBO in some ways is kind of a subtype of irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. And a big part of what's happening there is we're providing carbohydrates that normally are actually digested by microbes down in the lower colon, but because some of those bugs are in the upper gut, the fermentation happens sooner, and that leads to bloating and diarrhea and GI symptoms like irritable bowel syndrome. And the really neat thing about the SuperGut products is the fiber blend is low FODMAP, meaning that they're not prone to being fermented in the upper gut and causing these problems, especially in things like SIBO. And that's a designation that we worked with actually Monash University in Australia. Monash is the university that first studied and developed the whole low FODMAP paradigm. And so we were super excited to actually get that designation from Monash on the fiber blend that's in the products.
Amazing. Is that the fiber blend that's in the bars and the shakes, or just the fiber powder?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The fiber blends in all the products is the same. Okay. And the fiber blends alone is what has the low FODMAP designation. We don't have that for the other products, but the components, the fibers that are in it, are low FODMAP.
Gotcha. Great.
It's incredible. What about children? Can they have this product?
We haven't studied it in children, but it's these are all foods, right? Generally regarded as safe foods. And yeah, there's no reason. In fact, I've got 3 lovely girls, actually 4 lovely girls. If I include my wife.
Oh yeah, you gotta include her. I was like, are you unsure about the 4?
Yeah, 4 lovely women at home, and they all really enjoy and look forward to having a snack periodically, especially with the bars.
How old are your girls?
Oh yeah, so 11, 8, and 5. Yeah.
Got the full range there. Oh, that's fun.
Full range. Yeah, they're great.
So no concern with increasing fiber being too much for like the little person's gut.
Well, I mean, as I was saying before, there's populations that had upwards of 100 grams a day I think people are really good at self-regulating too, their diet. And so yeah, having a bar as a kiddo is perfectly fine.
Yeah, cool. Since you're so steeped in this research, I'm curious what your kitchen looks like and what is your family eating on a daily basis? What does your fiber intake look like on a really good day?
Don't tell anyone I had pizza last night. No.
I love that you're human. Tell us the rest.
Yeah, I mean, diet's really hard when you live in an environment, a community that is one way, and yet kind of there's other healthier ways of being. Like, gosh, what if we were all foragers, and yet that's not really a feasible solution. So what I tend to follow myself is really following the 4 phonetic Fs of food, and choosing foods that are high in all those components as much as possible. And yeah, we all lead real lives. We all occasionally have fast food, and that's fine. I think it's actually Michael Pollan that also says cheat every now and then, because if we completely limit foods that might be less healthy, that probably just sets up a psychological situation for maybe actually sort of like a binge and then avoidance cycle.
Sure.
So yeah. Yeah, so I think the 4 phonetic Fs are a big piece of what I follow, and
are you eating a lot of seeds, like just like dumping them on top of everything you eat?
Yeah, so seeds are great. Handfuls of nuts. I was just enjoying my steel cut oats with dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is a wonderful source of fiber and phenols. Dark chocolate is probably,
thank you.
Yeah, like you're making her very happy.
Yeah. Like if you just sprinkle, cocoa powder, that's like perfect. And the darker the chocolate, the better. Like sugar that's added, isn't always the best. But fiber is a perfect food because it captures all 4 phonetic Fs. And it's one of the few that does that, right? So it's high in fiber. Cocoa powder is about 50% fiber. It's high in phenols, polyphenols. There's, this has been very deeply studied by the chocolate industry. And so phenols, it's a fermented food. Not everyone realizes that chocolate is actually fermented. And gosh, it has good fats too. It's very high in omega-3. So
you're making me so happy.
It's perfect. Yeah.
All right, everybody, eat SuperGut and chocolate. Awesome.
Chocolate, yeah.
I have a question about oats, because you mentioned beta glucans are really important. But one of the first things I see with my CGM clients is that oatmeal just tends to be disastrous. Oats and oat milk. And best case scenario, we add protein, fat, and fiber, and that helps diminish the glucose excursions. But what do you think is really going on there? Like, if there is fiber that's useful, why are we seeing such a high excursion?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. One, oat milk, the fiber content is super low, and it's actually concentrated for simple carbohydrates. Not true for most plant milks, rice milk in particular. And so they tend to have really high glycemic index. Nut milks may be a little bit different, like almond milk. But a lot of almond milks have sugar added because they're not sweet. Right. Plant-based milks, one has to be mindful of the sugar content, both added and not added. In terms of oats, I've got a question for you. When you see these spikes, is it in instant oats or quick oats versus, say, like a steel cut oat? Or do you see it universally across all types of oats?
It's pretty universal, though. I'll say most of my clients, like levels clients, are doing steel cut oats because they're fairly educated and they're going to choose the best version of the oats. But it's usually, first thing in the morning when your glucose is pretty vulnerable.
Yeah. And so one of the ways of mitigating those glucose spikes is what you add to the oat. So certainly you want to start with steel cut, and steel cut that may be, overnight oats, so that they have that. There's additional resistance starch that you alluded to that happens when things are cooled after being heated. But adding things like nuts and seeds, and even cream or chocolate, because it's actually high in fat, can mitigate those blood glucose excursions and really help. And so what you add to those oats can actually be really important too.
So the natural fibers before it's cooled is just not enough to offset the pure carbohydrate?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of carbohydrate in oats. If it weren't for those spikes in those natural carbohydrates, it would be a pretty wonderful food because it has resistant starch and beta glucan, and it's kind of very similar to the formulation of the fiber blend and SuperGut. But there are a lot of simple carbohydrates there too. And for folks that are really trying to limit that for whatever reason, let's say they have diabetes, or other reasons for keeping their blood glucose low, that can be a problem, as you allude to. And so one of the nice things about the supplement is it's concentrated, right? Really, really concentrated for those good fibers without the simple carbohydrates present.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep.
I feel like you just have to experiment. There's so many variables, like steel cut, quick oats, with nuts, without, all these, like, that's why you got to really test and figure out what works best for
and
you.
Everyone's different too, right? Everyone
Right.
has different metabolism, different genes, different microbes in their gut. So working with a registered dietitian or working with a health coach is really, really important.
Yeah. I've had some clients that can eat oatmeal, and I look at their CGM data. I'm like, wait, really? Is that true? Yeah, that's like
you win a prize.
Yeah.
You've seen these companies that are profiling the gut microbiome and then making specific recommendations on what can and cannot be eaten for spikes in blood glucose. So there's actually Day 2 and Zoe, both.
I haven't done that
very
one.
Similar things. Yeah.
Cool. So Zoe's also a stool analysis, and then they're looking at the microbes for that. Yeah, that is really interesting. Actually, Lauren and I, we both did Day 2 the same time, and we got CGMs, and we were together for a couple of days. So we were comparing on the app what different foods were saying. And then we tried, I don't know, pineapple was always like the most memorable one that, like, my glucose went whoop, and yours was like not terrible, but and we're sisters. So we have some similarities, only 2 years apart. But
it was pretty accurate from stool test to CGM.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's cool that you had that personal experience too. I also, was one of the guinea pigs, so to speak, with Day 2. And
cool.
Yeah, the founding scientist very well from time at the foundation. We developed a nice friendship.
Awesome. Always nice to experiment on yourself. It's like, I'll be a guinea pig because then I get all the data and I can know what I'm supposed to eat. So,
that's right.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
I have a question about fasting, because you did mention a lot of the focus is on removing, and we want to make sure we're adding back in the good stuff. What's your general opinion on fasting to kind of reset the microbiome?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a ton of research happening right now in fasting, especially in diabetes, metabolic disease, prediabetes. And I will say that the data is really interesting and somewhat compelling. And there's different types of fasting, right? There's intermittent fasting, and even intermittent fasting, there's different types there. Are you completely avoiding eating some days of the week, or, are you just eating within this time block? And is that time block in the morning or the evening? And a lot of it's not a one size fits all type approach. But there is a theory in metabolic disease and weight gain that surrounds this idea that these glucose excursions, so high glucose, leads to release of insulin, and then insulin leads to deposition of that glucose, those glucose calories, largely in fat cells in the form of fat. And there's a lot of debate as to whether that hypothesis is true, that these glucose spikes are what are contributing to metabolic disease and weight gain. But one might theorize that during intermittent fasting, you're essentially resetting that mechanism and preventing those glucose excursions, so that in some ways the metabolic system is calibrated. And we could sort of wax and wane philosophically and think about, well, how did our ancestors eat? And they probably didn't have a constant supply of food like we do, and couldn't open the refrigerator and enjoy a swig of orange juice, every hour of the day.
Right, 24/7 access. Yeah.
What's in the fridge at 2 a.m.?
So I think that there's probably something to that. I mean, I'm a big believer in wisdom tradition, and that we need to tap into that more than we currently do. In fact, one of my last initiatives at the Gates Foundation was around fermented foods and tapping into the wisdom traditions of Africa and Asia around fermented foods, and understanding how traditional cultures use those foods, and actually in very rigorous ways, scientifically validating their impact on health in women of childbearing age. So yeah, I put wisdom tradition into a similar bucket. Like if you look at a lot of advice that's given even within, say, like religions around the world, there's often a fasting component there. Around holidays, and maybe there's something to that in terms of the biology of it. Who knows?
Yeah. So interesting.
I almost always ask our guests, whatever they're talking about, I'm always like, okay, well, how did our ancestors do that? But I didn't even have to ask you, because you answered that in the beginning when you said they were eating a lot of tubers and things. But yeah, there's so much ancestral wisdom. And you're reminding me of a book, Sally Fallon's book.
Mm-hmm.
What do either of you remember the name of that one? It sounds similar to what you said. I can't find it. Oh, I'll have to link to it in the show notes.
Bend over.
I feel like you practically said the name of the book and what you just said, but it's all about the different fermentation practices from around the world, basically.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I want to look it up.
Super neat.
Nourishing traditions.
Nourishing traditions. That's awesome. I'll have to read that book. I haven't heard of that.
It's intense.
One of my favorite books is written by a colleague and friend, actually him and his wife, Justin and Erica Sonnenberg. And they're at Stanford. They have a microbiome lab. They're probably the leading thinkers in microbiome as it interfaces with food in the world. And they wrote a book called The Good Gut, and delve deep into how fermented foods impact gut diversity and health at large. And they actually recently published a paper that shows how fermented foods in particular lead to improved diversity in the gut and decreased inflammation in the body. So that's a really accessible read. Not the paper. For folks that want to get technical, they can read the paper, but the book, The Good Gut, is a really accessible read for understanding how fermented foods and high fiber foods help.
Awesome. We will
I haven't read that.
Link that in the show notes.
Yeah. Good gut.
Okay, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Is it possible to have good metabolic health in absence of good microbiome health? Or would you double down on the microbiome as number one command?
An excellent question. So keto is a big craze. And metabolic health, by avoiding essentially carbohydrates and inducing ketosis, can definitely be improved. And so if you look at all the different metabolic measures like hemoglobin A1C and cholesterol and, blood pressure, weight, yada, 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 the literature is supporting that very low carbohydrate diets, which are essentially ketogenic diets, can be beneficial in some people with medical supervision. And is that promoting gut health? Well, the studies that have looked at the microbiome in ketogenic diets, there is a depletion of the key bugs that are making short chain fatty acids. And that would be bifidobacterium and Clostridium cluster 14A, for those that like technical terms. So, and there is some concern that there might be increased inflammation in the gut, and maybe there could be a higher risk of colon cancer potentially, and inflammatory bowel disease, and some early signals there. So I think very low carbohydrate diets in certain populations are incredibly useful, but are they contributing to gut health? Maybe not. And is there a way that you can achieve ketosis and still have good gut health? Perhaps through fibers that are not digestible?
Maybe. Yes, and maybe that's the missed opportunity with keto, just adding in the fiber. Yeah,
it could be, because the fibers will not, especially concentrated fibers, like say for example in SuperGut, they won't lead to blood glucose excursion. They won't spike your insulin, and they won't take you out of ketosis. So in some ways, this might truly be a way to have your cake and eat it too, right? And ketosis. And I have this theory that in folks that have found themselves in the incredibly discouraging space of metabolic disease, where weight, you just can't seem to get it off, and you have diabetes for life. Well, what do you do? I do wonder if there's a role for ketosis, under medical supervision in this population. And then, well, can you do a ketogenic diet for the rest of your life? Maybe. Is it hard? Yeah, super hard. And might there be long-term benefits? Ramifications? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So I wonder, and this is all just hypothesis on my part, but I wonder if something like a very low carbohydrate diet could be a measure to get you back into short-term metabolic health. And then maybe things like fiber supplements, both during that and then continued beyond, are what maintain that metabolic health. And you can go back to, a more liberal diet, but you're kind of put back on track, right? And you use natural tools like fibers to keep you on track, as opposed to just going back to your previous diet before. I think fiber supplements might play a really important role there, but we'll see. We'll see what the future holds.
Yeah,
I think that's excellent advice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, it'd be really cool to see some of the big carnivore supporters out there if they added some fiber in. I don't know. Lots to see in the future.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Damman, we just want to ask you for one final piece of advice, since you have done such a great job answering all of our questions. Thank you for that. But if you can leave our audience with something that they could start doing today to optimize their health and wellness, other than increasing fiber and taking SuperGut.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we didn't talk about lifestyle factors at all. And just as there's the 4 phonetic Fs to feed your microbiome with food, there's also the 4 Ms of lifestyle to promote gut health and a healthy microbiome. And I call those 4 Ms molecules, microbes, movement, and mind. It's a rebrand of things we already know with a really important piece inserted. So molecules, and for each of these, there's good and bad. Molecules are food and toxins. Okay. We'll skip microbes. Movement is exercise or sedentarism, right? Just not moving, playing video games too much, not getting outside. So that's the exercise piece, food, exercise. And then a part that I think many people are keyed into now is mind. And that's both the good part of mind, which would be sleep and rest and meditation and music, where you're giving your mind a pause. And the flip side of, depression and anxiety, where the mind is in override. All three of these things have been shown in peer-reviewed research to profoundly impact gut health and the microbiome, and vice versa, right? The road is two-way. It's a two-way highway. Right. I think what I'd love to interject into that tripartite approach to health is explicitly the microbe piece. And that's the fourth M, if you want to call it that. And what does that mean? Well, that means eating things like fermented foods. It means gardening, right? And getting out and exposing yourself to soil microbes that actually has been shown to increase diversity in your gut. Having pets, pets in households, infants that have pets actually grow up to have less allergic disease. And if you look at communities that say are, associated with farm animals versus not, there's also lower rates of allergic disease there as well. So I think this is the missing dimension of health, and making it explicit as that fourth M is absolutely critical. And if I could leave just one bit of advice, it would be that. In addition to eat more fiber.
Yeah. And everything around. You've made me very happy today. I'm going to keep eating my chocolate, and my dog is going to keep sleeping in my bed.
And movement. Awesome. Lauren's favorite is movement. So yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome.
So are you a runner, or what's your preferred movement?
I do a lot of mobility, kettlebells, and just functional movement. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
She just never sits. We joke that even when she was, I'm younger than her, so I don't remember it, but apparently when she was, how old? You were climbing out of the crib, and at 2 years old, 2 years old, she's swinging on the restaurant things, like out and about, so our parents have said she's just never sat still. She's the movement queen.
Even now, I'm stuck touching.
You're the one standing too, right? Yeah.
Yep.
I can see that. Yeah, we're hardwired to be the way we are. It's one of the good things about the diversity of us.
Yep. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you spending all the time with us.
Yeah, it was great fun. Nice to meet Lauren and Renee. Real pleasure.
Yeah. Tell our audience where they can find out more about you and more about SuperGut.
Yeah. So if they want to learn more about the product and the shakes and the bars and the fiber blend, supergut.com. So that's one word, supergut.com. In terms of me, I'm a gastroenterologist at the University of Washington, and I write a little bit of a blog as well, and SuperGut has a blog too. So, gut is in all the names. So The Good Gut was the book I recommended from their friends. SuperGut is the name of the company. Gut Bites is one of the blogs. There's also the SuperGut blog. So there's a lot of good source of information out there.
Amazing. We'll definitely link to all of those in the show notes so they can continue their education. But thank you so much for joining us today. This is really a lot of fun. Very fascinating.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I learned a lot too. And thanks to everyone that tuned in today. We will see you next time.